Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Adepoju, and I'm the community manager for the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting. And the subject that we are trying to discuss today became well mainstreamed during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past, we used to have journalists that would be working on a story and would desire to travel from, probably you are working in Nigeria, you want to do a story that covers across Europe and Latin America. Sometimes you can be able to do that and fly around. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, when everything was shut down and when there were no international travels, we were still, the journalism ecosystem had to come to terms with the fact that things have to be creatively done in a more unique way. And these really mainstreamed cross-border journalism. And even though the global transport system has reopened, people are already traveling from one place to another. The benefit of cross-border journalism is something that is expected to transcend beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, considering the fact that it has always been in place before the COVID-19 pandemic. And talking about collaboration to write stories, it's not something that is easy. We all know that, and that is why somebody like me, as a journalist, I always say I've not really done much collaborative work because freelancers are really doing things on their own, which is something that I'm really impressed about with the group of guests that we have today. And these are three amazing journalists. I'm starting from Mike. Mike, who is joining us from a car from the US. So Mike is a very good professional photojournalist. How are you doing, Mike? And hopefully you can still hear us live. Can you hear me, Mike? No, Mike cannot hear me. Okay, let me go to Karáth. Karáth, how are you doing?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yes,
Paul.
yes, yes.
All is
Thank
good
you.
from Ecuador.
Yes, yes, I know. Karáth is joining us from Ecuador, and so I'll go back to Mike. Mike, yeah, I think Mike is stable now. Mike, can you hear me? No, Mike doesn't have audio. Mike, they're not good, so I'll probably come back to you. So I'll start with Karáth. So before we go to your story for your grant winning story, um, let's talk briefly about your background as a journalist, the kinds of stories that you do, and the kinds of stuff that you were into before the COVID-19 pandemic came all about. So let's have your quick background on journalism.
Sure. So officially, I'm a science journalist. I have a master's in science journalism and I have a bachelor in zoology. So basically, I always mostly covered environmental sciences and conservation. But very quickly, I realized that I'm not that interested in pure science in itself, but how it interacts with society and technology and any kind of other disciplines. So basically, I branched out more into these kind of stories, and I was mostly doing some written stuff before the pandemic and some documentaries. But then I quickly became interested in basically any kind of stories that kind of engage everything together and basically have a bigger impact on the ground. And that's one of the reasons I moved to Ecuador. I'm originally from Hungary. But once I participated in a biodiversity conservation conference in Colombia, it was also supported by a journalism grant. And I realized that basically, as a white person, I can use my privilege and actually move to those places and try to help people tell their story rather than sit in an office in London and use the phone. I felt like I would like to take this responsibility more seriously. So I've been living in Ecuador for 4 years now and trying to produce documentaries and articles and podcasts with people on the ground helping to tell their stories.
Thank you very much for that brief introduction, and I'm really glad that today we are joining participants can also join us live from the Facebook. They're watching us live from the Facebook. In addition to those that are watching us live on the Zoom platform, please, we're always happy to know where you are joining us from, so that if there are any localization that we can do in the course of this session, we can do that. So please use the chat box to let us know where you are joining us from. We are going to really appreciate it. And if you're also watching this live stream on Facebook, we are also glad that you can watch this session today with us. And if you have any question for our guests today, do not hesitate to use the comment box under the Facebook live stream video that you are watching right now. I would like to go back to Mike, if I can do that for a minute. Mike, Mike, are you there? No, Mike is there, but okay. So while we'll try again with Mike. So Karáth, let's talk about the COVID pandemic and the kinds of stories that you saw, especially considering the fact that you have this core science background. So how do you think? What is your personal perspective about the challenges of reporting COVID? So let's start from there.
Well, I mean, there are many things we can talk about, but as a freelancer who doesn't work for a news agency, but specializes in long form articles, like obviously it was very frustrating that in the beginning of the pandemic, even though Ecuador, for example, was quite heavily impacted, it actually took a while until the international media noticed it. And very correctly, they actually made collaborations with a very high-level local digital news outlet called Heka.cd. So I think they did very great collaboration, but it took a while. So I very quickly realized that there's no point for me driving around without having a background of paper, and I better pay attention to longer brewing stuff rather than trying to find a newsy angle. Because especially as a freelancer, you know, selling these stories as they progress is quite challenging unless you have an ongoing relationship with an editor at a newsy site. Plus, I believe like you also have to take responsibility as a freelancer for yourself, because sadly, often there are very few editors who would take responsibility for the health and safety for a freelancer. It's not really included in your contract. So you have to weigh your personal safety in this occasion. So in the beginning, I mostly followed what's going on rather than rushing out and getting sick myself, because we were really unsure what's going on. But in the meantime, I kept close contact with people I knew who were locals or worked in different areas. And that's how I basically found this story as well, because a friend of mine works in the countryside. She's a director of a reserve, and she works close with communities. And she was complaining to me like, oh no, like all these rural medics in the middle of nowhere, they basically run out of aspirin and paracetamol, and the government is not doing anything, which I found very appalling. So that just kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And then when I saw the opportunity for this grant, I pitched to the other guys what they thought about it.
Mike, I really want to talk to Mike. Mike, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me now, Paul?
Very good. Thank you very much, Mike. So I think Karáth ended our talk with how the peculiar situations of COVID prompted the pitch. Let's talk about these coming together. How did you guys come together, and so that we can build it from there, from your personal experience. How did these all come together? Mike?
Yeah, and we have Langela too.
Oh, hi,
So-
guys.
Mike, yes, Mike?
Hello, welcome, Angela.
Mike has given up the floor again. Langela, are you with us?
Yes, Paul, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. So, for those that do not know, he is the third person in this award-winning team. So, let's talk about how the team came together. So, how was that assembled? Angela?
Yes,
Paul, did you want me to answer that?
yes, go ahead, Mike.
So yes, I just wanted to say that it was thanks to ICFJ that really we met. There was a call for this proposal, and we found each other through the forum. And it's always so important but interesting and difficult to try to make these cross-border connections. So we had never worked before together until we worked on this project. But essentially, this grant was for an American journalist to work with one or more journalists in different countries, and so there were so many people on the forum who were looking for an American journalist to work with, and really, I have to say that as I looked through different requests, Karáth and Ndhlovu were the two most impressive journalists I found, who I immediately thought I wanted to work with them, looking at projects they had done in the past. And I thought it was particularly great because we come from different backgrounds in terms of our focus. I'm a photojournalist. Karáth does amazing videos, and Ndhlovu is primarily a writer. And we can all do all these things, but we brought these different skills together. So on one hand, it was great. On the other hand, since we never met in person, and it was sometimes difficult to communicate, both because of technological issues, the kind of things we're seeing today, but also just the cross-cultural issues made it challenging, but also, I think, led to a richer final project.
Thank you very much. Langelo, so what do you have to add to how the whole team came together?
Okay, thank you, Paul. Hi, Mike and Karáth and the viewers. Yes, basically, we started conversations in the forum, as Mike has said, and then I DM'd Karáth, and then we started the conversations, and that's how we linked up. And yes, we really worked very well in terms of everything, in terms of coming up with the stories. So many meetings. We had a couple. I countless meetings that we had in a week, in a month. We did follow-ups, followed each other up in terms of what we had planned. For example, we came up with coverage plans. We came up with the topic focus, and and all those, and the proposed sources for our stories, expert sources, and the proposed publication lists. So all these things, yes, they came up as a result of after we had sat down and discussed in terms of what we wanted to look at.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to the persons that brought it to our attention that the chat was disabled. So please, you can now, the chat box is open. Kindly let us know where you are joining us from. I would like to hear from you. Still with the audience, I have a quick question that I will ask, especially for those that are journalists regarding their cross-border journalism. So, have you written a cross-border story before? It's a simple, straightforward question. Yes, no, yes, no. So, We are looking at a trend. 67% said no, 31% said yes. So while we are looking at this, I'll put it somewhere. So let's start with the positive side. I'll go around, and the question is this: what did you find most exciting with this cross-border experience? So I'll start with Karáth. What was most exciting for you working together with these fellow journalists?
Well, as a freelancer, you mostly work alone. So for me, first of all, it was exciting to finally be in a team and share different experiences. But apart from this, definitely to see the perspective of the same topic from different countries, and also how all of these stories basically had very similar elements, even though we were literally in 3 different continents, in very, very different cultural backgrounds. So I think that was very exciting to see how the stories are blooming. And even though they were done in very different environments, we all shared common experiences. So I think it had this positive impact of also being inspired by the others and motivated by their work, which is something you kind of miss when you work as a freelancer alone. So that was my favorite part.
Mike, what was a positive experience for you working with this team?
I would agree with what Karáth said, that it's really just great to work as a team. In my career, I've sometimes worked at newspapers where you're in the newsroom and there are people around you working perhaps on the same story. Oh, and I've worked as a freelancer, and it can get lonely as a freelancer. So I really appreciated building those relationships. But the fascinating thing is, I think, these were sort of hyper local stories that we were each doing. They were about, a particular town and how that place was experiencing COVID. And it was really fascinating as Ndhlovu said, we met once a week, usually on Fridays, and to compare notes and discover, that the same issues are happening all over the world. Because, I find COVID reporting in general, it's either generalities of what's happening, in a whole country or in a whole variant, or it's very specific to one country. But I mean, really, I had very little idea what exactly was happening, say in South America, in Africa, as far as COVID. And I learned so much from working with these two, just about how not COVID itself, but how COVID has affected the economy and people's lives and traditions. And I really felt like that gave a depth to our reporting that would not have been possible, even if, say, it was some kind of different, if we weren't limited from traveling and we could travel and I could go to these countries, I wouldn't obviously get the same depth of reporting as because we each knew our communities so well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ndhlovu, do you have something very brief to add?
Yes. Also interestingly was to also look at the developing country, particularly Zimbabwe. We are a developing nation, and also make a comparison with Ecuador and New York. So the story really tried to look at the gaps that are there in terms of the developments and the underdeveloped.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me allow you to catch a breath. So we have everybody, all the results in. Everybody actually participated in the polling. First polling that we will do on this, that will have 100% participation. So let's get the result. Drum roll. Yeah, so let's say 60%, almost 60%, almost 6 out of 10 participants said they've not done that before, while about 4 out of 10 said they've actually had that experience, which I think, let's go to Karáth. Is this a positive? Do you consider it positive enough, or do you think fewer than normal journalists have done this, or larger than expected journalists that have done this. So what are your thoughts on this poll result?
I think talking about my personal feelings regarding the cross-border story, I think it's very rewarding, but it was scary. Before I applied for it, I was looking at other cross-border stories and trying to not just work together with the guys, but learn how to do it, but also coming up with a story that we can pitch for the grant. And sometimes I got a little bit scared that some of the cross-border stories were so amazing and so complicated and like crazy details that go into, they were like investigative and long-term. And I felt like the bar is really high. And, you know, it would take a long time to develop these kind of stories and find connections. But sometimes later I realized that sometimes you don't have to, because that's not the point. Sometimes with something as big as a pandemic that is affecting all, it is important and simple enough just to compare. So I think I get how people actually haven't done that many cross-border stories, because you felt like maybe your story is not good enough for that. But I would encourage people to still try, because it doesn't have to have like an insane level of complexity, because those people find these links after years of work, and that's how they pitch it. So sometimes I think you should trust your gut and enter it, because in the end of it, like as Mike and Angela said, we all learned a lot from it, and we will do the next one better and better. So we will get to the very, very weird and complicated stories as well. But I think for the start, it is important to start with something that you feel comfortable with. And it can be a simple angle. And it is very important to compare the different experiences, because as the guy said, in the end, sometimes editors, I'm sorry, but they force us to find the insane, unique differences in your countries. But I think in this case, it was more important to find that actually, no, even though Ecuador and Zimbabwe are developing countries, but the US has the very, very same issues in different levels as these other two countries. And I think in this case, it was more important to find the similarities than the differences.
That was really, really good. Thank you for that. So let me ask, if I want to start out in collaborative journalism, cross-border story, how do I assemble my team? Or what advice will you give me? And let me start with Mike. So what advice will you give me in really assembling a team for a cross-border story? Mike?
I think ideally, can you hear me? I think ideally you start with a story first. I mean, that's how I like to work anyway, is, you know, I have all these ideas for stories, and it's always both difficult to find partners and difficult to find someone who wants to publish it. But I think, you know, in my experience anyway, once I've settled on a story that interests me, then I can look to people who are working on similar projects. And so, I mean, so that's one way to do it, is let the partnerships be driven by the story itself. The other way to do it is, you know, I've worked internationally with people who I already know and have a good relationship with. And in some ways that's easier because, you know, if I think, for example, you know, I've worked some in Japan and I know some journalists there. And so if I had an idea, I could contact them and say, you know, is this something you're interested in working on with me? Because I already know that I work well with those people. But the problem is that they may, you know, I might like that person personally, but they might not know anything about this specific topic. It may not be their area of expertise. So in this case, we were all interested in COVID, and that sort of brought us together. And we all knew a lot already about what was happening in our own countries. And I think that was where the strength lied. What do you guys think?
What do you guys think?
Also, maybe to add on, maybe to be journalists, we need to be on the lookout of the opportunities of these collaboration opportunities. For example, we on the FCIJ forum on Facebook. That's where we saw the opportunity. That's where I got to know about this reporting sort of, yeah. And then and then you take it from there. If you maybe, let's say someone is in South Africa, maybe the focus is in, that kind of a thing, and then you start looking and start talking, making conversations in terms of the people that are interested. That's how we came up. That's how this project actually came about for us.
Yeah, okay. So the big question that I have on my mind when I started, I just wanted you guys to get the good juices out. We know we covered it. The practicality of cross-border it seems to be a serious task for every journalist, especially when you are used to your process, you are used to how you do your thing, how you interview, you don't need approval, you don't need to carry others along. But when you are doing a cross-border story, like you said, you have to meet 2 times in a week to catch up on this. So let's talk about the challenges. Let's talk about the practicality of this experience. What are the obstacles you had to overcome? What was really, really difficult? Did you have any arguments? Let's talk about those arguments and disagreements. Did you box on Zoom? I'll start with Mike. Mike, what was your most challenging experiences? And yeah, Karáth, you can take that while we wait for Mike.
Sure. I think especially if you work with people you haven't worked before, even if they have amazing credential, you should have some previous Zoom meetings or like online meetings. And I think one thing I have done differently is really come up with a set of questions of how do you work in different senses and how do you tackle. It's almost like a job interview. But I'm not saying that if you answer in whatever different way, you're almost you are disqualified. It just means that we need to build up teamwork based on that. Because I think we have different rhythms that we work. We have different responsibilities. Like I live alone, I don't have a partner, I don't have children. And obviously, so I have different flexibilities as Mike or Ndhlovu would have. And obviously I need to be open for their responsibilities beside being a journalist. And then the different time zones, and then the different, I think different definitions of what certain things mean. I think we try to do a lot of things right, but we didn't communicate about them well enough. So we always try to come up with the same worksheet that we ask the same questions, at least a set of same questions. Obviously, then we would ask some super specific questions depending on our stories. And we always try to give some deadlines, but we're different. For example, I'm a last minute kind of person. So I finish by the deadline, but probably I will put an all-nighter before that. But Ndhlovu always finished well beforehand, always like that. But then I have different integrity when it comes to data and scientific facts and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the other 2 guys don't necessarily know that. So I need to flag them those things. They flag me different kind of stuff. So I think we learn a lot from each other, but we have to be sometimes brutally honest and even just drag in our personal problems sometimes, because in that way the other 2 person can be empathetic and we can be flexible with the working schedule. But the problem comes when you already get commissioned by the editor and then they're demanding the story. And then it gets very frustrating because you basically have to harass the other person to please work. And sometimes you have to just set very strict boundaries. So it's like being understanding, but also set boundaries and limits. So it's a juggling. But I think in the end, we all had respect for each other. And I think that managed us to pull through all the problems and issues we had. So, and sometimes I think one good advice somebody gave me, like a mentor that we had, that somebody should always be the leader of the team and kind of set the limits and requirements, but also try to phrase certain requests in a more culturally appropriate and accommodating way. Like if that person is struggling with finding good science, for example, then you can help them. Look, this is the website. Why don't you try from this? If you have difficulty with the sources, because, for example, your government is a bit difficult, then maybe you should look at these organizations. So, you know, it's all sorts of ways you can help to push the other so that we all reporting matches up. So I think that's something I would consider to be important, and it was difficult in this partnership. But the guys are fun, and, you know, we respected each other's work. So I think in the end, we managed to not kill each other that much, just a little bit sometimes.
Mike, can you expatiate on that a little bit? That Karáth said, what were the frictions that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome it? I think Mike is not reachable. Ndhlovu, can you help me highlight those differences that you had and how these were dealt with? Practical sense, case in point, specificity. What happened?
Absolutely. Particularly for me, the challenges had to do with maybe technical internet connection, also time management on my part. But I think these two guys, they showed leadership. Actually, we actually worked we created a one Google document where we would insert our separate, separate whatever pieces before the set deadline, and then we would discuss from there. So I think that actually helped most. But in terms of the internet connectivity, I wasn't able to be on the online all the time, on the meetings all the time. So it really frustrated these guys most. I remember at one point they wrote me a very long email.
Ndhlovu, I want to read that email. Can you access it for us? No, I was just joking. Continue, please.
I got a very long email. Then and then when I sat and tried to reflect, I thought, this is an attack now. What is happening here? Then I remembered that we are a team, and at the end of the day, we need to finalize the goal, and we need to deliver on the project. So yeah, we respected each other. So we never feared each other to call each other out if you were astray. You know, Karáth has said she actually fact checked everything, and Mike also, like the stuff that you'd post on that one Google document, they would actually fact check and say, this area you are saying there are 200 people, but we've discovered that that kind of a thing. So it really helped the project in that regard, and also working together. And yeah, I really respected these guys and I learned a lot from them.
So we have a okay, Mike, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, in two different ways, communication was so essential to this project because, I mean, obviously the technical issues, on one hand, it's amazing that we can talk to each other in different parts of the world, but it's also so often so frustrating when we'd have a meeting and for technical reasons, one of us or another of us couldn't connect. And so it just requires a lot of flexibility because, you just always have to adapt. And in another way, communication, as Karáth said, there were times when we wanted to strangle each other. So I think what was really important is at the beginning, we were strangers. We kind of only knew each other on paper. And during the course of it, we started to be willing to be honest with each other about what difficulties we're experiencing, whether it was, difficulties reaching sources or other obligations that prevented us from working at some certain period of time. So over the course of basically a year that we worked together, not quite a year. There were times when, for example, when I had a lot of time to work and I was able to make a lot of progress for myself and for the team. And then, I got a full-time newspaper job, and suddenly I had very little time. And so that just being able to change, but still keeping the big picture in mind, I think is what enabled us to get through it. And I've said this before, but Karáth and Ndhlovu, I'm sorry that sometimes I wasn't able to fulfill my obligations, but I'm glad that at other times I could pick up the slack when you guys had things going on. And so, just trusting that everybody had the best of intentions is, I think, what enabled us to work as a team.
Yeah, thank you very much. Karáth, do you want to respond to that?
I think, we have this culture, maybe in journalism or just generic, that.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, continue, please.
Sorry.
Johannes, give us a minute. I'll come back to you. Let Karáth finish.
So basically, what I wanted to say that right now we have this culture around the world, but maybe a little bit more in journalism, that you always have to be perfect. You also always have to deliver, because every single opportunity will be the death of you, or maybe you will, gain more opportunity from it. So, but this level of perfectionism kind of forgets that we are all human, and we have different kind of difficulties in our life that we shouldn't compare. You should just understand. So I think it's very important in a teamwork to be empathetic. I'm not saying allowing people and not calling out on each other, but as Mike said, I think even if it's embarrassing, you have to be brutally honest about it. Like if you got a full-time job and you also have 2 kids, if your boyfriend of 3 years broke up with you in the middle of the reporting trip and you feel like you cannot move out from your bed. So it's like, allow yourself to be vulnerable in a team like this. Like, this is not the office of the New York Times that you're going to lose your job or whatever if you show an ounce of weakness. These are human beings that you can, be honest about it if you are a good team. And I think in the beginning, after we got to each other, I felt comfortable with showing vulnerability for these guys. And I think that allowed us to move past through our difficulties and frustrations. And sometimes be angry, but, also understanding. So I think that's very important in a cross-border, especially if you are all kind of freelancer kind of team.
Yes, Johannes wants to ask a question. Like Johannes, let me activate your mic again. I thought I gave you permission. Johannes, you can talk now.
All right, I'm to be heard, but my network is not good.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear
All
you,
right.
Johannes. Yes.
Sorry for the delayed participation. And I have some questions for you, both of you. So what the cross-border? Hello?
Hello. We are with you. We are hearing you. We'll come back to you, Johannes. Dorcas, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. This is Ekupe Dorcas. I don't know if I'm audible enough.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so I'm Ekupe Dorcas from Cameroon, a freelance journalist. I think it's very interesting hearing about cross-border stories, but I just have one question, one worry. How do we get to know more of these stories, especially stories that could be accepted? Are there past works, links to publications so that we get to know more, since we're talking about cross-border story, to make it practical? Thank you.
Who wants to go for that? Yeah, you can. You have the floor.
So it was a bit tricky, but actually I found a website that helps you to build up cross-border teams and story ideas. And it has a lot of examples that they're analyzing. So when we got together, I actually linked that to everyone and we read it. And I think it helps a lot. I will try to find it and put it in the link for you. It's a very good website for building up cross-border story ideas. But you can also look up different grants and check who won, basically, and see the final product.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. I always do that too. Anytime I want to apply for a grant, I will look for the past winners. Ndhlovu, do you also have any recommendations regarding the kinds of stories that could potentially win reporting grants, especially for those that are targeting cross-border reporting?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think what Karáth is saying is very key. You need to see the published cross-border works and take a read in terms of look at scrutinize all those, and also factor in your project that you want to also look at to see in terms of the topic focus, in terms of how they handle it, the whole story, and yeah, that can actually give you an idea in terms of pitching your own idea. Yes,
Mike?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, really there are global stories, you know, like the pandemic, you know, healthcare issues, you know, war, poverty, environmental issues, where you can take an approach from any country and look at it. And then there are sort of by country issues, you know, like, you know, say like where two countries are, you know, very closely related in terms of a specific issue, like say immigration between Mexico and the United States, for example, where really it's almost essential to take a cross-border approach. The problem, though, is really to find publishers that are interested. We talked definitely to publishers who were interested, say, just in one piece of our project. You know, like I talked to some newspapers who were happy to publish my reporting about COVID in the United States, but they didn't really have any interest in what was going on in Ecuador-Zimbabwe. And so we really, I mean, we tried to pitch it as, you know, three perspectives from three different continents. And I think that helped. You know, if we had a bigger grant and more partners, you know, would have been fascinating to do, you know, reporting from every continent. Well, not Antarctica, I suppose, but every other continent. But really, I just want to emphasize that once you have a project and the partners, a lot of the hard work is finding the publisher. And I wish I had some perfect advice of how to find the publisher, but for us, it meant looking a lot at publications that were doing similar stories and just, you know, sending out a lot of emails, making phone calls, trying to find people who we could convince. And really having the grant helped us because we could say, look, we already have funding to do the reporting. We just want a place to tell this amazing story. I mean, of course, the publication still paid us, but somehow it seemed to take the pressure off for the publishers to know that we were going to do this, whether or not they published it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, so let's talk about so that those that are trying to picture what the structuring of a cross-border story looks like and the roles of each person. So I would like you to tell about this project, what you did, the roles that each person played in that, in putting this together, and yeah, so let's create that practical scenario as a model for cross-border journalism. So let's start with Karáth.
I think it's very useful to assign different roles to each other, depending on your strength. So, for example, when we were preparing the reporting for the Undark stuff, I had the most experience with video. So I gave like a very quick workshops on for the guys of how to shoot, how to prepare a shot list. I actually prepared the shot list for all of them, and just basically what to pay attention. And then one of us was the copy editor. We all pitched in for questions and we compared that. We agreed that we should have a set of questions that we all ask, because in the end of it, this is a comparison story. So we do have to hit some similar marks. And then I think one of us was in charge of always keeping a tabs on the others if we deliver in time. So basically playing into your strength as a journalist, but also as a person. For example, I'm not a native English speaker, so I was very grateful for the other guys to always keep in check on my grammar or suggest different things. And apart from that, I think meetings are important, but some meetings can be emails, so it depends on your schedule. But always checking on each other is very important before and after, for example, of the reporting trip, if you have done it, but also for safety. What else? Suggesting different ways to reach sources. I think that was very, very cool. And also just kind of work together with the editor, because, for example, the Undark editor had different requirements. So you have your own idea, and it's perfect that we all had like a pretty strong vision how we want to have our story, and we communicated that to the editor, and they were very accommodating, but they also said, you know, we have this format and that format. And so basically have a good idea of how you imagine your story, because in the end, you have a vision of a final product. And it's important that you take authority on that. But you obviously you have to be flexible enough to accommodate your editor, but be firm if some sort of stuff is possible or not possible. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for my point of view, I think.
Mike?
Yeah,
Thank you
I
very
want
much.
to talk a little bit about the structure of the stories themselves. I mean,
Ioannis, just give us a minute. Let Mike be done. We'll be back to you.
All right, all right. I'll wait.
so just, you know, in the story that we did for Undark and for Scientific American, we basically wrote 3 parallel stories that looked at similar issues, but each of them could stand on their own. And so the stories were strengthened by being published together, but they were also sort of unique. Whereas by comparison, the British Medical Journal story was a completely different structure, where we essentially wrote it together and we all contributed, but then we had to, you know, edit it as a team, rewrite it as a team. And I think it's probably useful when you're going into a project like this to have an idea with your team about what kind of structure you would like to try to tackle. We were able to serve useful roles, like Karáth said, you know, editing and guiding each other and giving feedback. You know, even when we were writing our own pieces, I think definitely my story was much strengthened by the fact that Ndhlovu and Karáth had read it and given me feedback before I submitted it to the editor. But it was really my story. And in a joint story, it's really necessary to, you know, to give up some control. You know, a lot of journalists, like Karáth said earlier, really want, you know, to, you know, manage every comma and every word choice. And when you're writing as a team, obviously that's not possible. You have to be willing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ioannis?
To think as a team, not to the Karáth.
Okay, Mike was cut off before. Mike, can
All
you? Mike?
All right. Yeah, I open my mic.
Yes, Ioannis, go ahead, please. Let's take your question now.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Johannes from Ethiopia. So I ask a question for you. So do you think that any international law that protects the journalists in international or cross-border reporting, is there any binding law? So this is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Karáth, legal implications for cross-border journalism. Ndhlovu, Mike, are you aware of any legal implications or any legal law?
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, obviously, I'm guilty of not checking, but I've never ever heard about anything like that. That's the problem. I think the main issue of being an on-ground freelancer, especially if you're from a different country, you have to be extremely careful, because you are on your own. I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, but in most places, unless you're a high-level correspondent from some very powerful international media organization, nobody cares about you. So that's why, for example, I could never be a freelance war correspondent, because you have to take care of your own. You have to look into that, maybe get your own insurance, maybe take different courses. That's why I'm, for example, I'm advocating for freelancers of being able to take the safety courses, both digital and on the ground. I think more freelancers should have the support, because they're very expensive and news organizations only paid for them for their stuff. There are grants, but you have to prove that you have high level jobs for that, or stories. And I think sometimes they're not aware of the complexities of this kind of stuff. So I don't think so there's any international law protecting cross-border journalism. That's why you really, really, really have to communicate with your partners and kind of flag this kind of stuff. That, for example, in Hungary, I could not talk to anyone, but here it's more relaxed. But for Langelo, it's absolutely different. The government is keeping a lot of tabs on journalists. So that's your own responsibility. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Langelo, I want to ask this question. I think which somebody asked a question regarding funding. Chikura, I would like to know, how do we get funding for the cross-border stories? Approach media outlets to publish your stories. I think Mike really answered part of that in his response. So I want you to take the seeking for funding for cross-border stories part, and how you go about convincing editors in getting these stories published. I know we've asked it has, some part of it has been answered, but I also like your contributions on this issue.
I think one has to have an idea. You have to pitch, I mean, a strong idea to the editors that will attract that sort of funding. So you really need to have that kind of a strong pitch that not only speaks to your region, but that really speaks to the international outlets, and also answer the why part. Why should I read this particular story? Is it a COVID pandemic? Why should I read it? Why should we care about this story? Also look at the impact of that particular story in terms of like in our story, you can see the gaps that we have, the developed, the underdeveloped, in terms of, if you are reading the three stories, you can actually pinpoint that there are similarities, but the gaps are there, and the way things are done. So yeah, that kind of an element should be applicable in your story idea. Yes.
Okay, then
Paul, I would just
Mike,
like
please
to add,
go ahead.
Paul, yeah, I mean, I feel like with editors, you have to convince them of three things. First of all, you have to sell them on the story and have them, decide whether that story is right for their publication. Second, you have to sort of show from your webpage or your past publications that you're a competent journalist. And third, you have to convince them that you're the right person to tell that.
Mike, we are struggling to hear
pull
you.
up some nuggets from your.
No, Mike, you are really breaking up. I can't hear you. Yeah, we'll come back to Mike. And another question that I think is really important as we go to the last couple of minutes is a money issue. When we have 3 journalists applying for a particular grant, what is your advice in terms of dealing with the grant and ensuring that everything is free and fair? Let me start with Karáth. I'll come back to Mike when Mike's network is clear with those nuggets that he wants to share. I think they are really important. So let's talk about money issues quickly. Karáth, so what is your advice from this experience?
I think you have to be very direct. So before we applied for this grant, and the grant was mostly suited for pairs, rather than 3 people, we just emailed each other and asked like, listen, we would like to apply for this grant, but we are 3 people, and you guys are okay with splitting the money evenly, even though it's less. So I think that's honesty in beginning worked well. And you have to make your own decision. And to be honest, even though we split the money 3 ways, later on, some editors I talked with told me like, we also chose your story because it was 3 different people from very different backgrounds and cultures. So it helped us to have a more global perspective. So sometimes you have to sacrifice one thing for the other. So I think that's very important. And then I told the guys, I think this grant allows us to really go to great lengths to bring very unique angles. So it's worth trying harder. Obviously, first you would have to exhaust your connections you already have. But for example, I've never written for Undark before. I knew another editor there, but she didn't get back to me. But I decided I really want to work for them. And I knew that they pay, for example, fair prices. And I knew other places pay fair prices. So I decided let's aim super high first, and then we can go lower and lower if we are not accepted. So I think some people do the opposite way. And they wait, I'm sorry to say this, but they waste really good stories in publications that are good, but those stories should have a much wider audience. And then you can negotiate with your editor. I think in some cases it's important, but in this specific case, I was the one who sent out all of the pitches for the places that we got accepted. And right away, I started with the fact that we won a grant. And then I had the story. And then I looked at each specific publications, the angles. So I kind of inserted that so they knew that I'm not copy pasting my pitch, but specialize it. And then, as Mike said, we all put our credentials and the best stories we did before. Plus, you have to highlight your access. So apart from saying like, oh, we already got the money to travel to the middle of the jungle in Ecuador, but by the way, I know this community, I've worked with them. Here's the names. Like, I think all of these stories should have a good level of generalness into them, but also some very specific information like name droppings, because in that way the editor knows that you already have the connection, you already have your main character. And sometimes that person didn't end up to be my main character, in fact, because, for example, their shift in that village ended. But through her, I could get in touch with the next team. So it's not the end of the world, but it helps the editor at that specific magazine know that you already have some money, so you can go there, so you can get exclusive pictures. You know that place. You already have some couple of people in mind who could be your main characters. Plus, you already done this. So it's not like it's your first journalistic work, so you will be able to deliver. And you also check the publication. So the editor will know, oh, this guy knows that we have never done this story before, or this is the story we have done, but not with this angle. Oh, and there's 3 other people in the team. So, this is, I think, the good elements to get the money and sell the story. It's just you and me, Ndhlovu.
Hello there, I'm Stella Roque, Director of Community Engagement. It seems like we've temporarily lost Paul as host here, but thank you again to our panelists. We're dealing with a lot of different technical challenges with this particular webinar. Kata, Lungelo, one question that I was really fascinated in asking you, in the middle of pandemic, why did you specifically choose the type of story that you did? Why did you decide to look at rural communities when you initially got together to plan your story?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Particularly in my part, rural areas are the most left out in terms of reportage. So you'd find out that the pandemic was being reported in the cities. Yes, so many are dying in the city, but the rural populace was forgotten. So it was kind of interesting to also go to the rural areas the remote areas and also hear their stories in terms of, if you are to look at the Undark lady who was also doing something towards COVID-19, it's really impressive from their end. I mean, from their likely contribution, which was maybe not covered by the mainstream media in Zimbabwe, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Well, I think we all forget a little bit that the grant also required that we cover a marginalized community. But personally, I think when you make choices like this, who to talk about, you have to play your strengths and you have to make use of your connections. And sometimes somebody dropping a certain sentence that stays with you is the sign of a good story. So in my case, I already had some good connection with rural communities in that specific area, but also my friend who works there all the time was complaining to me like, oh my God, Kata, you cannot imagine. I had to take some money from the reserve and buy some medicine for the health station there because they already even run out of paracetamol. And that is shocking. So I know it's an age-old trope that things that you tell your friends in the pub and what shocks them should be the one that makes it into the story, but it's so true. I kept remembering that, and any person I told to from whatever background were shocked. So I thought maybe it is as simple as it is, that I already know those people. This is something very shocking. And why is that? And then we talked about it with the other guys, and we realized in a way we all have access and connections to rural areas, especially L'Angelo is like most of the country is super rural. So maybe we should just plan something that is easily accessible for us, and it's not a lot of hard work to make connections, and start with that and see how it goes. And I think it ended up being the most interesting angle we could find.
And another question I have, this was still in the middle of the pandemic where vaccines had just started to be rolled out. As freelancers, you mentioned the fact that, you're not really protected. You have to be responsible for your own insurance, your own security, your own safety. Did you three also make a plan in terms of just your own health safety for this story? For example, I imagine vaccine access in Ecuador and in the United States and in Zimbabwe are very, very different at the time that you began working on your stories. I don't know if Ndhlovu wants to take this one. Oh no, is he frozen? Or maybe Karáth, perhaps you could take this one.
There we go. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure if we really talked about it, mainly because by the time we came to field work, I think the situation in all of the countries kind of improved. But I do remember us telling each other which day we're going to go there and which day we're going to come back. But we did have like kind of quick talk about our responsibility as outside reporters, not bringing in any COVID, because most of these communities are so rural that actually they ended up not having that much COVID cases, and it would have been devastating for them. So I talked to people in those communities beforehand, like get in touch with the health team there and ask like, I'm triple vaccine, I'm gonna wear a mask. So all through that reporting, I was aware of that. But it's very difficult because protocol rules were very different in all of the three countries. So maybe actually this should have been something that we discussed more thoroughly. But by the time we reported it, and I think we were lucky just to have like a little lull in all of it. But I think both L'Angelo and Mike got COVID, except me. So in later on, not during reporting.
Oh, geez, that must have been quite a situation to manage as well, in terms of like taking care of your health while reporting on COVID-19 in these areas. What would you say was the most surprising thing that you discovered while you were in the middle of reporting in each of your regions, and when you were in meetings sort of comparing notes?
Oh, they just reconnected.
Oh, there you go, Mike. Oh, can you hear us? Oh, I think
I
Mike.
can't hear you. Yes. Sorry, I lost you guys for a little while.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so my question was, what's probably the most surprising thing you discovered in the course of your reporting when you were comparing notes in the different regions that you were actually tracking the story?
Well, I have two answers to that question. I'd say, first of all, the most surprising thing about myself is that I discovered some limits that I didn't know I had. Now that I'm not as young as I used to be, I used to be able to do anything, just keep working as long as needed. And now I can't do that anymore. I can't work 24/7 anymore. But as far as COVID goes, I'd say it was really surprising to me. I mean, I went into this project wondering, why is the US, which is generally a fairly wealthy country, dealing with COVID so poorly? And I wouldn't say I have an answer to that question, but I have some inklings now just from having looked at, having a better idea of the problems faced in South America, in Africa. Although they have a lot less, a shockingly smaller budget per patient in those countries, they're still doing relatively well. And it's mostly a government bureaucracy issue, I think. And so it was just fascinating that way to compare notes.
And Ndhlovu and Karáth, which would you say was the most surprising thing?
Yes, absolutely. For our part in Zimbabwe, the COVID pandemic actually caught the officials unaware. People were unaware in terms of it was actually a check in terms of our public health systems that were not strong enough to actually address the issue. So you'd find out that the government started to spruce up infrastructure, doing infrastructure development, also looking at the issues of the pandemic awareness campaigns, those things. So it was something that was of a surprise in terms of that the systems we don't have strong systems to deal with the pandemics per se. So it was a sort of now trying to patch up, trying to catch up. But also on the positive is that we saw the drilling of boreholes, we saw the for water, for washing of hands, so that kind of a thing. So there is a lot of benefit that COVID actually brought into the health institutions, into schools, into so that this issue actually then started to report on these on this post that the health institutions are getting, which they were not getting. And it also helped to say, so we need oxygen tanks, we need all these sort of equipment to deal with COVID-19.
And Karáth?
Well, for me, there were maybe three most shocking things. One, the rolling system, like that in Ecuador and many South American countries, they have this rolling system that rural healthcare workers are actually only stay there for like a couple of months or a year in case of Ecuador. Meanwhile, in Europe, most villages would have their own doctor who has been the doctor there for like 2 decades. So that's something was shocking for me, that basically these communities will never have someone permanent who could, remember the different diagnoses and people's problems and know where they live and their specificities. That's one. The fact that they were all recent graduates, I felt like it's very, very unfair and high toll on someone with almost very little hands-on experience to go to a remote area they've never ever been in their entire life, and then work with little to no resources and be very, very inventive about solutions. but also the coordination zones. Like I always say in every single story I write, that bureaucracy were gonna kill us all, because some of the coordination zones, the different governments that came and went and changed, made zero sense. And healthcare policy advisor have been always complaining about that. For example, if you have a jungle community, but there are no road system connecting them to that hospital, why are they belonging to another coordination zone? They cannot physically cross the jungle, even though like kilometer wise on the map, it looked close, but they had to take all the circle, and they are passing by a hospital and another one in another coordination zone, just because they were 10 kilometers on the other side, which personally for me felt insane that these people have to deal with this. And then these young doctors, I mean, I know being a doctor requires you a certain financial background, and most of them grew up in cities, but I still feel like they cared a lot and they really tried to come up with any kind of solutions. But most of the time, like they were completely abandoned, and they could only solve it with the help of the community. So I think that's very, very critical in all our stories, that these people have so little resources, they have to be innovative, and they have to rely on the community, when it shouldn't be the responsibility of the community, but the government.
Thank you so much. And it seems
I would just like to add to that.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
I really found in all three of our countries, I really discovered, that the nurses and doctors and frontline workers really understand day-to-day what problems they're facing, because they're doing it, all day. And you take one step removed, like hospital administrators or healthcare administrators only have a vague idea of what the frontline workers are doing. And then you go another step removed, and like the local administration bureaucracy or state bureaucracy, those bureaucrats really have no idea what's going on, and it makes it so it's impossible to pivot quickly, because in all three of our countries the decisions are made by the bureaucrats in the capital or in the big cities, and there's several layers of separation between them and the rural nurses and doctors who actually know what's going on. And I think it suggests that this problem is going to just continue unless you somehow empower the local healthcare workers to actually have a voice in making decisions.
Thank you so much. It seems we have our host back, so I'm going to go back. I'm actually helping technical production because Paul and I tag team in these sessions. So I'm going to hand the control of the session back to him. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Stella, for stepping in, and many thanks to Mike, to Karáth, to Ndhlovu, and for being able to open up and share your experience with us. And this is really an exciting time. Personally, I really believe that cross-border journalism seems exciting and attractive to editors. That is why it's really important for individual journalists to really know how to be able to do this and do it effectively, assemble the right team, and get the best of results. And I've seen in the question box that somebody is requesting for how to stay in touch with other members of this or with other participants on this call. So we have a solution for that, which is our Facebook forum. We have a very good Facebook forum that we have thousands of journalists from different parts of the world that are part of. So please go to Facebook and look for ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting, and request to join and be part of it. If you are trying to assemble a team, if you are trying to assemble a team of journalists that you'd like to work with, I'm really glad to help you. But I know that is an effective way for you to actually reach out and be part of this larger group of journalists that you can collaborate with. And like Ndhlovu said, grant was, he saw the grant in the forum. So please be part of the forum and you'll be able to access lots more information and resources through that. And for you to be able to know more about this initiative, the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting, please check out ICFJ website on www.icfj.org. And IJNet also has lots of resources on cross-border journalism. This is just, I consider what we've done today as an introduction to an extensive line of work, but you can access resources on this subject matter on highchainnet.org. So please endeavor to really do that and stay in touch. And so thank you very much, despite the network. Thank you very much, Mike, for joining us. We didn't know it would be possible, but I really appreciate your tenaciousness and your interest in being able to share your experience with other journalists. Thank you, Ndhlovu. As always, you're always amazing. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you, Karáth, for everything. And congratulations to each and every one of you on the success of your story. And I wish you the best of luck in everything that you have planned ahead. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Oh, thanks for coming. Bye.
ISFJ for organizing this, and also for organizing the grant and the forum. I really want to say the forum is a great place to meet other journalists doing such important work.
Same, I agree. Go to the forum and find yourself some collaborators and get to work. Bye, guys.